Hello, everybody. Peter Maravellis here. On behalf of City Lights booksellers and publishers and the City Lights Foundation, I'd like to wish you all a happy new year as we begin our winter season of City Lights Live, the virtual reading series that follows in the footsteps of our in-store calendar during the time of the pandemic. We had taken a few weeks off during the holidays. It's good to be back. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as San Francisco, from where we continue to celebrate the works of authors we know and love with readings, discussions, and forums moving into 2022, but hopefully towards a COVID-free era. So I can't think of a better way to start off the winter season than by welcoming back to City Lights, Gina Apostol. We are delighted to be celebrating the US release of her award-winning debut novel, Bibliolepsy. It's published by our friends at Soho Press. It was the winner of the Philippine National Book Award. Now, it tells a story of a young woman caught between a lifelong desire to escape into books and a time of political upheaval that she lives in. I mean, it's a loving ode to the written word and a meditation on how one makes it through trying times. And something I think that we can all relate to is the political polarization in the US and the COVID pandemic takes its toll on us, and how we all kind of struggle to maintain equilibrium. And I think books in the literary life has always offered us solace. And the novel Bibliolepsy is a thoughtful reminder of that. So Gina Apostol is the author of the novels Insurrecto, Gun Dealer's Daughter, and The Revolution According to Raymundo Mata. She is the recipient of a PEN Open Book Award and 2 Philippine National Book Awards. Her essays and stories have appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Foreign Policy, Gettysburg Review, as well as many other outlets. She makes her home in New York City and Western Massachusetts. So joining her tonight in conversation is Malaka Gharib. Malaka Gharib is a writer, journalist, and cartoonist. She is the author of I Was Their American Dream, a graphic memoir, which is a winner of the 2020 Arab American Book Award and named one of the best books of the year by NPR, The Washington Post, Kirkus Reviews, and the New York Public Library. Her forthcoming graphic novel, It Won't Always Be Like This, comes out in fall of 2022. By day, she works on NPR's Science Desk as an editor covering the topic of global health and development. Her comics, zines, and writing have been published by NPR, Catapult, The Seventh Wave Magazine, The Believer, as well as many others. She makes her home in Nashville, Tennessee. So before we begin, I would like to remind you, we're going to be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase copies of Bibliolepsy, as well as other books by Ms. Apostol, as well as Ms. Gharib. So we will be hosting a Q&A towards the end of the evening. So if you have any questions, comments, or praise, please do post them in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard. So everyone, please join us now in giving a warm welcome to our evening's guests, Gina Apostol, Malaka Gharib. It is such a great pleasure and an honor to have you both gracing our virtual halls. Welcome to City Lights Live.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
That was such a good introduction, Peter. You were so good. I love that you summed up Gina's book so well. So I wanted to start this event with having Gina do a reading from her book. So I'll put the floor to you, Gina.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with the opening of the book, Bibliolepsy, a mawkishness derived from habitual aloneness and congenital desire. Manifestations, a quickening between the thighs and the points of the breast, a broad aching V when addressed by writers, books, bibliographies, dictionaries, Xerox machines, a sympathy for typists of manuscripts. Etymologically related to Humbert Humbert's gross tenderness, though rarely possessing its callous tragedy, occasionally accompanied by a liking for rock and roll. The endless logo itch, desperately seeking, but it can't get no satisfaction. Biblioleptic attacks usually followed by bouts of complete distaste for words. And then I'm going to read a section, we were talking about this, Malak, about which one, but so in this section, she's been looking for, the character Primi has been looking for the books that her parents told her about when they had first met. I found it, Ma, I found it. I rushed to my parents in the sala, clutching the books. Which one of these is the book from the boat? I showed them my catch. My mother looked up. She stalked over and grabbed the books. Give them to me. She was angry. Where did you get these, maldita? Prospero, look. She waved the books at my father. Prima, she's just a child. She has no understanding of those things. Not this child. She reads. Look. And my mother took my hand, brought me to my father, and held a book out to me. Primi, what does this say? Autobiography of a Louse. See? Triumphant, my mom shook the book before me. My father came forward. He pointed to a word. What about this, child? What does this say? And this? I read him the words labia, mound, and fellatio. My father shook his head. She's a genius. He pointed to fellatio. But what does this mean, Tata? I shrugged. A kind of sea animal, I ventured. See, Prima, she has no understanding. He pinched me on the mouth, smiling. Tell your sister, you don't need to be taught everything, or your teachers will never like you. My mother knelt before me with the book. What about this, Primi? She ventured. What does this mean? Lips, I said. She stood up. You're right, Prospero. She has no understanding. But you're staying in your room until I say you can come out. No more spying on your mother and father. And give me those books. I confronted my sister. It's your fault. I'm grounded all day. She was painting her toenails in extreme orange oils, using polish from bottles shoplifted weekly from Senpo X store. Little primitivity, what is it now? They know I can read. Good. So now they'll stop lying to you about your stupid medicine being ice cream. It so clearly says it's medicine, geez. With the daintiest flick, Anna finished drawing the ear of a mouse onto her big toe and began to stab at the mouse's head to make a nose. Anna was a precocious body painter and budding miniaturist. She had our father's gift for forms. At 11, her dream was to learn tattooing and set up her own tattoo parlor. What's fellatio, Annie? Spell it. I did. Sounds like an illness to me. Wait, I'll check. She lifted her toe and dragged herself by her heels and bottom to our set of the Oxford English Dictionary. She took the magnifying glasses as she looked for the word in volume 5, vanva to follis. Platydicate, fabricals, fecula, there it is, fellatio. She looked at me. Interesting. What does it say? An act in which the partner's penis is sucked or licked. Yuck, I said, disgusting. Then I thought about it. What's a penis? I asked. Hence, fellator or fellatrix, the partner who performs such an act. What is that, a circus thing? No, dummy. It's what people do when they grow up. Not even cats do it, I think. And they eat roaches. Anna returned to her toes. Humans are pernicious, she concluded. She shoved the book at me and went on with her work. I turned the volume around to look at the entry. Every word was incomprehensible except for the word sucker, but I liked looking at this book. It had dates in it, a kind of biography of words. It listed down how words were used in different times. It wrote down sisters and fathers and cousins of words. It treated words like people with a personal history. The sentences like mysterious pasts you did not have to understand. They read like misbehaving ancestors. It impressed me then, that morning, as I looked at the dates, that this word had been used in ancient times, 1887, what a long time ago, when people didn't have much to talk about, most probably, and they thought about fellatio. The dictionary revealed to me times I will never know. So that's the end.
I love that. You can hear me because I was muted, but I was laughing along, and it's very entertaining hearing you read it rather than just me reading it myself. Thank you for that. I hope that you all, audience, enjoyed those excerpts too. They're delightful. There's more funny stuff in the book as well. Lots of sex.
Yeah, lots of sex.
And we are going to have a lot of questions about that much later in our conversation. I can't wait to get into it. I was already thinking of like 3 or 4 more questions to ask you. So I think what's notable about this book is that it came out in 1997, and this is coming out now in the US for the first time, but the book has been around, and you had certainly been working on this book since you were a student, right? In the 80s, right? Yeah. So I wanted to know what inspired you to first start writing this work, and what was going on in your life, in these early stages of development with the book.
Yeah, I was still in college. I was still at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. And I distinctly remember, I was just in my dorm room, just doing this. I was so attached to books and to words and to reading that I wanted to figure out why what was this thing? And also, it was something that I knew what I wanted to write about. I wanted to articulate what it is to feel this way, to have love. And for me, the love that I had was love for books. So I wanted to articulate love, really is what I wanted, and desire. And my experience at the age of 19 was a desire for books. That was what love meant to me. But at the same time, I began writing it the year that Ninoy Aquino was killed. This senator was killed on the airport tarmac. And it seems that I think the evidence shows that he was killed by the goons of Imelda Marcos, that it was very much related to Fabian Ver, Imelda Marcos, those people. But it definitely rocked the city that someone was killed right in front, in broad daylight as he's coming home, right on the airport tarmac. And it led to eventually all of these protests against the dictatorship. We had already been protesting. As a student at the university, I was already protesting like crazy. But 1983 into 1986, when the snap elections had happened, and the widow of the senator was cheated of the election, and people really went on the street with that conclusion to the elections, where Marcos won, and people did not believe that he had won. So the love of books, the bringing in of desire that I wanted to write about in this novel came together with rebellion.
Wow. And we're going to get into more of that later, but I guess the question that I want to ask now is how much of the main character Primi is based on you? And I also want to know a little bit more about her and her world that she lives in.
Yeah. So Primi grows up in Tacloban, which is where I grew up. And Primi goes to school in Diliman, which is where I went to school. So for me, the issues of geography, those concrete details of place, they're the ones that allowed me to move into Primi's world. So I knew Tacloban, I knew Diliman, and I created, it was useful for me to use those places for her story. But Primi herself, for instance, her parents die. No one knows exactly how they died. They seem to have committed suicide while on a boat, and so she becomes an orphan. She has a weird grandmother who is like a weirdo haciendera owner. She has one sister. So all of those things are just Primi's world. So that's not my world. What I do as a writer, I think, is I need to create a concrete space for my characters. So I use the worlds that I know. And so a lot of my books actually have Diliman, because Diliman was so important to me in my development as a writer and as a thinker, the university, and my hometown, Tacloban. So it was part of the charge of writing the book for me is bringing those places into global literature, actually. You know, to put Tacloban into world literature is really funny, because Tacloban is, even the Philippines, Tacloban is very obscure. You know, no one really would write about Tacloban except for the fact that that's where Imelda also comes from. So that's an annoying part of Tacloban. So and bringing in the world of the university was a huge charge for me. So those are the things that are part of me, but everything else is not me.
So yeah. So tell me about Preemi's journey in the book, and I guess like in that we can sort of get a little bit more of a sense of what the book is about.
Yeah.
Tell me what's going on with Preemi.
So Preemi, so her parents die when she's quite young, and she's very attached to them. But at the same time, she's very attached to, even before the trauma of her parents, she's already very attached to words. And she's always, you know, all Filipinos have this, I think will have, you can hear it in Filipinos. Filipinos are huge punners. They love to pun. They're always, because, and I think that's because you have multiple languages. And so I bring into Preemi this love for words. Huh?
Like that's it, pansit.
Yeah, that's it, pansit, or everything, just just look at a Filipino's Twitter handle and all of the puns that go on in the Twitter handle. It's kind of crazy. And so I do think there's something about the Filipino there and her love for words, because you're constantly recognizing language as growing up as a child, knowing very well that you're going to learn in English, even though your language is my language is Waray. I had to learn Tagalog because, as a Waray, I had to learn Tagalog. So you're very aware of language. So she is in love with words. Her parents die. And really the whole story is that she's so in love with words that all she wants to do during the time of the rebellion is fuck writers. All she wants to do is have sex and with writers, and they have to be writers. They have to be poets, actually. She only fucks poets. And so the whole book is just this Preemi's adventures with poets in the middle of rebellion, which is really, one, I think it's funny. So it was fun to do, where I, for instance, as a woman, in that period, I was always marching, but Preemi is just fucking. So so it's really that, and then how she it's really a series of adventures with men, and how that might, but it concludes in the fall of the dictator. So there's a weird way in which the book and Preemi's desire for words and language come into collision with the body politic. So the body and the body politic come together in the story of Preemi. And so it ends somehow with the fall of the dictator. But the story itself, in my view, doesn't really quite end.
So there is so much sex in your book. There's like sex in like almost every few pages. And I love it. It's glorious. But I've also never seen the word clitoral used as an adjective so much. So tell us about the role that sex plays in the book and with Preemi's life and journey.
Yeah, I thought that the sex escapades really had to do with trying to articulate the desire and love for words. Because the thing about the desire and love for words is that there's no plot to it. There's no plot. You just like books, you just like words. So I had her, so the way I created plot was to have her fucking poets and just going through these series of they're not even relationships, so that allow me to talk about books. So every adventure with a writer is a way for her to talk about an epilogue, or a way for her to talk about masturbation is a way for her to talk about the climax, and all of these different things. So or the isolation of the reader, masturbation and the isolation of the reader, all of these things. So they're all it was a way for me to, one, get a plot going, and two, really have fun with words, and have fun with making connections that you wouldn't ordinarily make, and that is true also because ultimately the connection that you wouldn't ordinarily make is the connection of fucking poets with having a rebellion, so that kind of so how to go from the personal to the political.
How does but she ends up meeting this guy, one of the guys that she has sex with, like is totally into books, and she finds that very boring. So how does that
She finds that's where I thought it had to be, because for one thing, I do think Primi's love for books is a way that she's defined herself, and in the novel you can see that there's some psychologizing of it. She has a therapist. Is it connected to your dad? Is it connected to your mom? The fact that they died, and you don't know why they died. There weren't even any bodies. They just disappeared in the water, and that the loss of the body of the parent is filled with the words. And of course, for anyone who knows psychoanalysis, words are also signs of absence. So so there's all of that work going on in terms of how to see why she's doing these things, but it's not enough. You have to connect with people. Reading is a beautiful thing, but the relationship that she has with Fernando is a kind of move in the novel that says, but there's a world out there. Because also that's very close to the rebellion time too. So that connection of, there's a world out there. And there's a world out there that's actually in this climax. It's a climactic world out there, the concatenation of orgasmic protests, the chain of protests that I also connect to sex. Also not
it means
also
like
not phallic sex, by the way. It's really clitoral. It's the vagina that's the center of the book. So so I think that while it was fun, and it's actually a true and potent and I think very human desire, this love that Primi has. There is an other, there's a world out there, and we need to be part of it.
As a book loving person, when you first wrote this book, when you made that connection in your book, were you just like, oh, screw books, forget it, like I'm never reading them again, I want to live in the real world?
No. All of my books are about the fact that there's no way out for the human but the multiplicity of our attentions. That we need to understand that our personal world is important, our personal loves, whether or not it's books or dogs or crafting or being Mother Teresa, all of these the things that we are personally attached to are important, but there's also our attention to the world around us, that we need to also read the news. We need to also love another person, love other people. We need to understand other people. We need to engage in politics. I think all of that. We need to engage in politics. We need to engage in politics in a way that does not ruin others, does not ruin the powerless, that makes the powerless less less hopeless. We need to engage in all of it, but the fact that we need to engage in our larger world doesn't mean that our the things that we are most attached to, that are very personal to us, are not also relevant. So I really believe in that. To be human, you need to be all. I think it's really important, and I think that's what I found was really kind of important in the collision of the body and the body politic in the book, that we need to grapple with that collision, and we need to both understand the power of our singular desire, as well as a requirement to be engaged in the other.
Damn. Yes, I feel like snapping. So did somebody live tweet that? They should have live tweeted that. No way out for the human, but for the multiplicity, and then I missed the rest. I'll have to watch this recording again. That was amazing. Yes. Oh my gosh, all of that. So much yes. That kind of led me to the one question that I wanted to know was what is the significance of publishing a book like this now, and what can readers take away from it now? I'm assuming that it's going to be very similar to your previous answer, but I just want to ask you.
Well, there are some things about the book that are kind of weird, because the book was about the 1986 rebellion, what Filipinos call people power, EDSA people power, and it kicked out the dictator, the Marcos family. Now, this many years later, the person who is way ahead in the polls to be president of the country is the son of the dictator. So I personally would have preferred them to have been executed, and I would have preferred justice against that family, but they weren't. They were. That's another whole story about how Filipinos deal with horror, that they just allow horror to start living among them. So they were never jailed. So this book comes out when the Marcoses are coming back, and the book is about the kicking out, the very powerful movement that where people said, our voices will be heard, and then in fact the people won in a way that was complete. I mean, it's also in the book. The people won in a way that was so unexpected. There was huge indeterminacy. Any political movement lives in indeterminacy, because you don't know what's going to happen. And I completely remember being on the streets and not knowing whether I was going to live or die, because there were all of these there were soldiers, pro Marcos and then pro Cory soldiers, right in front of you with all their guns and their bazookas and things. So the whole indeterminacy of the project of protest, and that's also happening in America now. The indeterminacy of what's going to happen in this country, given the fact that there was an insurrection in January 6th, and we don't know what it means to be living in this space where justice might not be done, and then if justice is not done, bad things return. That's kind of the, I think, message of Filipinos to Americans in this time. When justice is not done to those who wreck your democracy, bad things return. That's what's happening in the Philippines now. They were not given justice. The Marcoses were not jailed. The Marcoses were not tried in a way that truly allowed the people to see the horrors of that dictatorship. They were tried in America. I think there were some cases in the Philippines, but again, the whole Filipino oligarchy, that's a whole different story. But the United States needs to really think about that. These are trying times for the concept of democracy. And if we're not careful, if we don't assert the 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 notions that have produced um, the humanity in this country, it's going to be hard.
Wow, I love that. If justice isn't done, bad things will return.
Yes,
That's
bad things
scary.
will return. So yeah, you better put those guys.
Yeah,
The
Um,
January 6th insurrectionists, that's a problem.
yeah.
I am very righteous. That's why I write novels.
Just a reminder that you all can buy Gina's book in the link in the chat. You can also buy my book in the link in the chat.
Yes.
And the Q&A is just around the corner. So if you have questions, please start thinking of them and then typing them. I would like for you to at least post 3 questions. Just kidding. But that'd be great. My mom is here. Mom, you should type a question in the chat as well. Okay. So I do have a few more questions for you. You know, I underlined this several times in your introduction, but you wrote that the book, you know, was a meditation about the cyclical endlessness of desiring. And what did you learn about the nature of desire in writing this book?
That's a great question. Yeah, thanks. I think that in terms of that cyclical nature of desiring, I think that what I get from that is that's why we do art. And so I feel that I was lucky that this is the book that I wrote when I was 19 when I began this book. This was the book that I wrote and eventually published. First, because whenever I go back to this book, it brings me to that very primal and I think very stabilizing notion that we kind of forget sometimes, you know, as we're dealing with, you know, the publishing industry, or we're dealing with all of these other things that are very external to the art that we're doing, that the cyclical nature of desiring is what makes us do art. And that desire to do art is a way that, given the fact that as humans, desire is constant, it allows us a grounding in, I think, a more profound way of being, like a way of being that's not about how will others see me, or will this make money, or all of these other things, but it's all about just kind of ground centering what is my desire and how can I speak it and how will it address address someone else. And it's a very basic kind of address, attention that comes from this cyclical nature of desire, because it's forever. I don't know, you know, every time I write one book, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. And I think I'm grounded in the fact that I believe in art. And that's also what Bibliolepsy is about. Bibliolepsy is a book that believes in art. Yeah.
Doesn't it feel exhausting that it's never ending?
It is. It's kind of weird that you would think that after you finish one book, it's like, okay, that's over. I can now just, you know, I want to learn how to sew, for instance. I want to learn how to sew and things like that. But no, I have another book. there's something else. Yeah, I would like to just, you know, knit or something, but yeah.
You know, you also wrote about how you didn't want the book to quite end. It kind of just sort of, it was like you want to create like a circle of some kind. And I wanted to ask you about that structure.
Yeah, it is something about the way I write, which is I think about structure a lot, you know, and I think it's because I write novels, and novels are so big and they keep going on. They take up a lot of time. And if you don't have a sense of structure, you kind of it's hard to finish, and it's hard to keep going. So this novel, because the novel was about this kind of cyclical desire, this circular desire, I thought that the structure should also mimic it. So what I do with my novels is that the structure mimics what the idea is, what the question might be. So it is actually hard to do a book that is kind of never ending, that you feel that it's not going to be finished, that it's not finished by the time it's so-called finished. It has to be both finished as well as feeling not finished. So that is actually the problem that I had with Bibliolepsy, because it has to be both. You can't have one without the other, because the reader gets annoyed. So because you're also thinking about your reader a lot. So the circle nature had to do with the fact that I think my structure should follow the thought of the book. Do you do that? Does your structure follow?
No, I'm not that cool. I have a journalist's mindset when it comes to storytelling. So every time I'm around creative writers and people who write fiction, they want to like shake me and be like, oh, shut up, like you got to move things around. So I actually just started a writing circle in Nashville for people of color. So we're hopefully going to fuck shit up together. So that's So I'm going to open the floor up to y'all. So if anybody has a question, maybe unmute yourself, or I don't know if you can, or put your question in the chat. It's more fun. Oh, my mom has a question. Go ahead, Mom. I don't think you can. Maybe you can.
Yes, unmute. Maybe.
Yeah, actually, everybody is on mute. But if you point somebody out, I can unmute them. Whom are you referring to?
It's Floor.
Okay, let me zip around here and see where. Oh, okay, there you go. Okay, got Floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Okay. Hi. Hi. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
At the start, you said that Tacloban and Diliman influenced you in your life. I know that you grew up in Tacloban because you said Imelda Marcos unfortunately grew up there also. Now, unbeknownst to you, I'm also from Diliman, University of the Philippines. How did Diliman affect you in your life to be who you are today, meaning at the university in the Philippines?
Oh, thank you so much for that question, Flor. Yeah, and it's a great question because all of my novels actually have Diliman in them. I was, in the Philippines, as you know, in the Philippines in our time, you graduated a lot earlier than Americans did. So you graduated 2 years earlier. So I was only 16 when I went to college. So I was 16 when I went to Diliman, and that's a very impressionable age. And it was kind of the height and waning years of the Marcos dictatorship. So the student protests were really were already going on, and they were almost they were constant, and I was very much involved in it. So I was just really struck in Diliman by the intellectual world of leftist activism. And they were my friends. So it was always talking about, Mao or Marx and things like that. At the same time that I was in the English department. So again, I think that's also Bibliolepsy, that collision of the English department with the Maoist Marxist world of the activists. And that is very much, that the trope of my life, really, just thinking about the fact I loved the world of literature that was also part of my Diliman world. And I loved the activism world that was also part of my Diliman world. So those two strains, art and politics, that Diliman introduced me to with a huge, I don't know how you experienced Diliman, but everyone was so passionate. Everyone had, had this desire, to be full, to be fulfilled by the world that they met around them. And so that world of desire and multiple colliding worlds that I had in Diliman. I was also, I was also very Catholic as a child. So there was also the Catholic stuff. There's just a lot of, everything was a thing of passion. And everything could be really worked through because everyone, you met so many different kinds of people. Also, I don't know how it was with you in Diliman. You met people from all over the country. So that too was another kind of education for me, knowing people from, Apari to Zamboanga.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Very good. That was good.
Thanks, Mom. So we have another question from Amy Jollymore. Gina, how has your writing process developed and changed from novel to novel?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Amy. All of my novels are actually really different. There was a Filipino critic who once said to me, I was recommending Insurrecto to this person who was asking about Philippine literature, but I had to say to that person, but her next novel is going to be quite different. So that's just the way it is. So even if Insurrecto is like this, the next novel. And so the writing process has changed because whenever I have a project, I'm just kind of listening to that project. And so I'm just listening to the project's demands. And the project's demands are really quite different from the previous books. So whereas I use whatever tricks and tools and all of these other things that I learned from my previous books, usually the project requires something else. So, and I think that's also why I choose the project. So it has changed and developed because the novels themselves demand something different. An example, for instance, is even from Bibliolepsy to the next novel that I actually finished. It wasn't the next novel that was published, Gun Dealer's Daughter. Bibliolepsy is very, I don't know how you call it, but there's a kind of hopscotchy aspect to Bibliolepsy. She's just going back and forth, even though there's that division of Tacloban and Manila. Gun Dealer's Daughter required an A to B plot, which I don't like to do. So I had to learn how to go from one incident to another where the climactic point actually really mattered. And I hate doing that. It's really not something I like. So, but I had to do it for the novel. And so people will notice that Gun Dealer's Daughter has a more or less seemingly straightforward plot. I mess it up at the end. I always mess things up. So but the novel required that climactic move. So it needed that kind of, here's what she thought at the beginning, and then it turns out, and this particular thing that she did at the end made her, it's a basic rising action climax denouement plot. So just that example.
Does anybody else have a question for Gina? Wave your hands wildly. And remember, you can buy a copy of Bibliolepsy in the link in the chat. Oh, from Ron. Gina, knowing how Filipinos enjoy food, telling jokes, and of course sex, what are your thoughts on how this love of life played against the activism and political atmosphere of the time in UP?
Yeah, I will say that it's not a binary thing. And in fact, that's kind of what I was trying to say both in Bibliolepsy, actually, and also in Gun Dealer's Daughter. Gun Dealer's Daughter is all about, the sex lives of activists, and the ways in which the, let's say, the left movement is very much, my experience of activism it was a lot of people, a lot of coupling, actually, a lot of people coupling. So there, it's not as if it plays against the activism and political atmosphere of the time at UP, they're always together. And that's actually another of the things that I'm constantly working within my novels. The fact that for the Filipinos are, one of the words that I use for Filipinos, they're a simultaneous people. They exist in simultaneity. Some people like to call it contradiction. For instance, I always say Filipinos are gay-loving homophobes, or they are matriarchal misogynists. So there's a kind of weird way in which Filipinos take in, again, that thing, the sensuality of the world. And so they make even politics sensuous. They make even things that are seemingly abstract. They put them into their life, into their body. And so I'm kind of interested in that simultaneity of Filipinos' concept of the self and of the world. It's allowed us to be very colonized, So here we are, very self-centered. Filipinos, I think, very self-centered. And at the same time, colonizer comes and, oh yeah, come on, we'll learn Spanish, we'll learn English. There's an interesting curiosity about the other. At the same time that Filipinos, even being very heavily colonized people, remain grounded in themselves, in who they are. It's kind of weird. So enjoying food, telling jokes, sex, etc. There's no binary. For me, Filipinos, they don't do binary. I think the binary actually comes from colonialism.
Thank you. So here we go from N. Rivera. Can you please both speak about any challenges you've experienced in the publishing media world as a POC, specifically as a Filipino?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I'd say is that Bibliolepsy, for instance, which was published in the Philippines in '97, is coming out in 2022. So that tells you a lot actually about, well, actually it doesn't tell you a lot because I didn't sell it. That's another, okay. So I didn't sell Bibliolepsy, but I did try to sell Gun Dealer's Daughter very early on. Gun Dealer's Daughter was finished in '98. And got published in 2012 in the States. In terms of, so the challenges, I guess the whole thing about the question is, I think so little of the publishing world. I think so little of the world outside the book. I don't think about it, so I think there has been a huge change in the way American publishing is currently viewing or reading others. It still has a long way to go. But the challenges for me in publishing as a Filipino lies in, it's not my problem, lies in the problem of the other person, lies in the problem of the white publishing group. So, and I tend not to think about them. It's like, I don't think about them. They're not my problem. I have an agent, I have an editor, and I will keep sending my work to my agent and my editor. And if my agent and my editor don't like the work that I do, I will think about it, definitely, because I really respect my agent and my editor. But ultimately, for me, if I don't center what my art needs and desires, there's no point in doing my art. So the concept, the question of challenge, the challenge of the publishing world, I'm just going, fuck you, So I don't really think about them.
That's great. I love that idea of how it's not your problem.
Yeah, it's not my problem. They have a problem. They do have a problem. But look at the books right now that I just bought, for instance. So here's Fiona and Jane, Jean Chen Ho, has Taiwanese. It centers the Taiwanese. And here's a Filipino book, Brown Girls, Filipino American, Daphne Palasi Andreades. And it's a book in the plural first person, all about just Asian American girls growing up in Queens. Here's another one, Wei Kiwan. She did chemistry, and she has this other book so many. And here's Jessamine Chan, School for Mothers, the School for Good Mothers. Again, these Asian American women writers, by the way, I do tend to buy Asian American women writers. They're out right now along with Bibliolepsy. So there is a change. Somehow, I think in the publishing world, they're figuring out. And here's Melissa Chadburn, a Filipino American, A Tiny Upward Shove. It starts off with an aswang, and it's coming out this year. Here's the opening, Tinikling, Double Dutch Filipina style. So it's coming out in from FSG, Farrar, Straus and Giroux. So there's some changes right now, but so that's great. I think it's good to know. What am I working on next? I actually have a novel. I wrote a novel during the pandemic, so it is very tough. It was very tough to be alive in the pandemic, as all of us know. So what I did was, and again, very biblioleptic, and I think this is where I'm very grateful that I wrote Bibliolepsy when I was so young, because it grounds me in this. It's the work that matters. It's the art that matters. And so I just kept writing during the pandemic. And of course, I'm lucky because I have all of these things, healthcare, job, all of that. But I'm also very focused during a time of stress. So I wrote this novel called La Tercera, and it used to be about the Filipino-American War, again, because I have so much on that. Two brothers, a collaborator and a revolutionary, but it ended up being about my mother. So I wrote a novel about my mom. So it's not even about Tacloban. It's about a teeny tiny town in Leyte, a river town that no one knows about. And I'm making that the center of the universe. I'm making my mother's hometown the center of the universe. And that was so much fun to do. So it connects the Filipino-American War, the American occupation of the country, to the martial law years, my mom's years, and my years as a person from Leyte. Oh, thanks for the reading this. Yeah, I think it's so great I always go and look at the list that people, BuzzFeed, Bustle, The Millions, and I think it's a great thing to do, to kind of see the energy that's actually out there. And I will say, I buy women and I buy people of color. So it's a very rich world right now for that reading.
Does anybody have any last questions for Gina? We have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ron.
All right, I think that is the end. Peter, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, this has been such a pleasure. And I love the way that the literary life and politics and sensuality all cross over into each other. There's so much going on in this book and in your oeuvre. And I encourage everyone, if you haven't gotten a copy of the book yet, check out the links in the chat function, get yourself a copy. Thank you, Gina Apostol. Thank you, Malaka Gharib, for doing the honors.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you, City Lights. It is a bookstore that is a biblioleptic bookstore, I have to say. It's very close to Bibliolepsy's heart. And thank you to Malaka and to her mom, Flor. Thank you for your question. And my best to all of you, and keep keep reading, keep buying from independent bookstores. I think that's so important. It's so important if you're thinking about keeping alive the books of people of color. Go and buy them at the independent bookstores. That's the way to go.